Chapter 4. It was good to be back raiding again, Erak thought, contentedly. Life as Oberjarl had its attractions, he had to admit, and it was pleasant to receive a 20% share of all the booty that the raiding fleet brought into Hollis home. But Erak had been born to be a sea raider, not a tax collector and administrator. Several years of sitting around in the great hall at Hollis home, going over receipts and estimates with Book7, his Hilfman, had left him bored and feeling the need for distraction. Whereas his predecessor, Ranyak, could have looked at taxes levied up on ships' captains and inland farmers with an undisguised, acquisitive glee. Erak felt vaguely uncomfortable with the amounts that they were piling up in his coffers. As a warp ship captain, his sympathies had always lain more with those who might seek to evade paying their full tax rather than the Oberjarl and the eagle-eyed Hilfman who levied it. Eventually, he had dropped the massive pile of scrolls, estimates, returns, harvest figures, and detailed inventories of goods and booty captured by the Jarls into Bors's lap and announced that he was going raiding again. "Just one last raid," he said to the indignant Hilfman. "I'll go mad if I sit here behind this desk any longer. I need to be back at sea." Reluctantly, Barca conceded the point. He had never been the warrior type himself. He'd never understood why the big, ruffian-like sea captains who were invariably elected Oberjarl couldn't share his passion for studying figures and detecting undeclared income. But he knew that they didn't. Even Ranyak, in the early days of his rule, had continued to go on occasional raids. It was only later, when he became lazy, that he found enjoyment in remaining at Hall's home and counting his riches over and over again. Erak then sent for Svengal, his former second-in-command, who had taken over the helm of Wolfwind, and informed him that he was assuming command again for one more raid. Some men might have been displeased by the prospect of being demoted to first mate, but Svengal was delighted to see Erak back in control. The two men were good friends, and Svengal knew that Erak was far better navigator than he was. So here they were, off the Riddy coast, approaching a small trading town of Al-Shabaab, doing their best to approach quietly. Al-Shabaab was one of the towns that provided supplies, equipment, timber, cordage, and canvas to ships entering the constant sea. It was an unremarkable place, built on a promontory above a small beach, with a man-made harbor on the northern side, accessed by stairs. At this time of year, ships of the trading fleets had begun to make their way into the constant sea in increasing numbers, bringing good trades from the islands of the southwest and the endless ocean. As they came, they stopped at Al-Shabaab, or one of its sister townships, to replenish water, food, firewood, and repair any damage caused by storms. When they sailed out of the harbor, they left behind a bewildering variety of gold coin and bullion used to pay their bills. Every so often, in response to a secret message from the town, an armed caravan from the inland capital of Morocco would arrive and collect the treasures from the town, taking it back to the Emerker's vaults. The first caravan of the year was due in another 2 weeks, Erak knew. The schedule was a closely guarded secret, for obvious reasons. If potential attackers had no idea when the treasure had been removed or not, it reduced the risk of attack. No right-minded pirate would risk his life in hope that there might be treasure in the township's storeroom. Secrecy and uncertainty were Al-Shabaab's best defense, particularly when the alternative would mean maintaining a large and expensive garrison for the entire year. But secrets can be uncovered, and a week earlier, 80 kilometers down the coast, Erak had paid an informant 40 reals of silver to gain a copy of the schedule. It told him that while other towns had already been emptied of their riches, Al-Shabaab's coffers were still temptingly full, and would remain so for some days to come. There was a small standing garrison in town, no more than 40 men, 40 sleepy, overweight, comfortable, already townsmen, who hadn't fought a real engagement in 20 years or more. And they wouldn't provide much resistance for 30 yelling, fiendish, bloodthirsty, gold-crazed Scandians who were screaming up from the beach like hellhounds. Peering through the darkness ahead, Erak could see the lighter patch of land that marked the small sand beach in front of the promontory. Instead of approaching from the seaward side, he had taken wolf wind deep into the bay and ran beside the promontory, approaching along the shoreline. The ship was hidden against the dark background of the land. They were actually approaching from the landward side of the town. When they went ashore at the beach, they would be at the foot of a hill leading up the rear wall. Most lookouts, he reasoned, would be concentrated on the walls looking out to sea. High above, the white buildings of the town itself were also becoming distinguishable in the rising sun. There were no lights, he noticed, no beacons or even torches to illuminate the path of the sentries who must be patrolling. He shrugged. Not a bad idea, he thought. A burning torch could make a sentry feel safe and secure, but it ruined his night vision and made it almost impossible for him to see anything beyond a few meters of the illuminated torch. Erak heard the gentle breaking of waves on the beach. There was no surf to speak of, just small wavelets tumbling over themselves. Swinging the tiller smoothly, he set the ship on a 45-degree approach to the sound. He raised his hand, palm up, and in a prearranged signal, and 16 oars rose, dripping out of the water. There was an occasional grunt of exertion as the rowers lifted the oars on the vertical and carefully lowered them, stowing them along the side of the rowing benches. Two clattered noisily, the sound seeming to be magnified by the silence around them. Erak glared at the offenders. He'd speak to them later, when they could speak more forcefully than the present situation allowed. There was a grating sound from the forward side, and he felt a dragging vibration through the soles of his feet as the keel ran into the sand. 4 men were poised at the bow gunwales, about to leap onto the shallow water and make the ship secure. "Go easy, line handlers," Svengol whispered hoarsely. The men, who would normally have dropped noisily into the knee-deep water, remembered at the last moment and lowered themselves carefully, taking 2 bow ropes with them. They ran up the beach, feet squeaking in the sand, and hauled the ship up a little further up onto dry land. They secured the bow ropes into the sand with huge, hinge-bladed sand grapnels, then faced inland, hands on their battle axes, alert for any sign of attack. Erak peered up at the town above them. Still, there was no sound of any alarm, no sign of guards or patrols. The whitewashed buildings looked almost ghostly in the pre-dawn light, looming quietly above the wolf ship. More men were lowering themselves onto the bow now, and others were carefully retrieving their shields and battle axes from beside the rowing benches and passing them down to one another. They took them with exaggerated care and piled them on the beach above the high water line. The shields, which were kept on the outer gunwales along the length of the ship, had been covered with a dark cloth to make them less conspicuous. The men stripped this off, found their respective weapons, and stood ready for their captain. Erak passed his own shield and axe down to one of the men standing in the shallow water, then lowered himself over the gunwale as well. He stretched down to an arm's length, then released his grip, falling only a few centimeters before his feet hit the wet sand. He took his shield and axe from one of his crewmen and moved to where the 30 men stood lined up. The 4 line handlers, who had been first to land, would remain with the ship. Erak couldn't help smiling as he felt a small thrill of adrenaline course through him. It was good to be back, he thought. "Remember," he told his raiding party, "keep the noise to an absolute minimum. Watch where you put your feet. I don't want you missing your step and sliding down the hill to your own personal avalanche." We want to get as close as we can before they spot us. With any luck, and from the look of things, we'll be inside the town before anyone raises the alarm." He paused, looking around at the tough, bearded faces before him. There were a few answering nods. Then he continued. "On the other hand, if we are spotted, all bets are off. Start yelling and raise the dead and go at 'em. Make 'em think there's an army out here's come to see them off." Often, he knew, a sleeping garrison would be paralyzed by fear at the sound of yelling, screaming body of attackers. He looked around. There was a rough patch at the foot of a hill, winding up toward the silent, sleeping town above them. He gestured toward it with the head of his axe. "That's our way to the top," he said, then hitching his shield up on his left shoulder, he uttered time-honored Scandian leader's call to action. "Follow me, boys."